Today is going to be a crash course on Flexbox within CSS. I am not going to cover everything in super detail here. If you want to have that coverage, then go check out other videos in this playlist. But this video is going to be a rundown of what Flexbox is, how it works, and some different things you can do with it, and different things that I use most in my day-to-day as a front-end engineer to kind of get you up and running with Flexbox without maybe necessarily going super in-depth in everything. And I'm going to use a complete guide to Flexbox, this article by Chris Hoyer from CSS Tricks, to kind of use as a outline for this video, okay? So first off, what is Flexbox? Well, Flexbox is a layout module that aims to provide a more efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items in a container, even when their size is unknown or dynamic. So CSS Flexbox, it allows you to lay elements out within your web page in a dynamic way. And particularly, it allows you to lay elements out in a single dimension. So either horizontally or vertically. So from left to right on your web page, from right to left, from top to bottom, or from bottom to top. And it's very dynamic, as it says here, meaning your Flex children or these items within your Flex container, they are going to be responsive in the event of the page size shrinking. So if you go from a desktop to a tablet or a phone, you'll still have a pretty good layout depending on how you set up your Flexbox. You can definitely set it up to have a nice flexible layout, okay, that is responsive to those different dimensions. Now, there's a few things that are important to know when it comes to just kind of Flexbox basics and terminology. So to create a Flexbox, you need to set display flex on a container element. And then all elements within that container element, or all children elements, immediate children, are going to be considered flex items. So you set display flex on an overall Flex container. So here, this gray background here, this might be your Flex container. And then all immediate children here, like Flex item number 1 here and Flex item number 2, these are going to be Flex items. And a couple important things to know here are that you're going to have two different axes that are important to understand. So you're going to have your main axis, which is going to run along the Flex items here. So these Flex items are laid out from left to right, horizontally across the page. And the main axis right here, that is going to be a line that runs through the middle along with those Flex items. So the main axis goes with the Flex items. If these Flex items were laid out from top to bottom in more of a column instead of a row, your main axis would also go with that from top to bottom. Okay? And then you also have a cross axis. This runs perpendicular to your main axis. So if your main axis runs from left to right, your cross axis is going to go from top to bottom and vice versa. It's always going to run in the kind of perpendicular direction. Okay. Now moving downward here, you can see that we have various Flex properties that you can set on your Flex container as well as your Flex items. So like I said earlier, to set an item to be the container of your Flexbox, you use display flex. So here in this example, they take the .container class and they set it to display flex. And if this element here was your container class, this purple, that would be your Flex container. And then all of these items, these orange boxes within it, would automatically be considered your Flex items. So you create a Flexbox using display flex. Now you can decide on how you want to lay out that Flexbox using flex direction. Do you want to lay things out from left to right, from right to left, from top to bottom, or from bottom to top? And you can do that using the flex direction property on your container here. Okay, so you set this on the container and you can set the flex direction to either row. That's just going to go from left to right. That is the default value for the flex direction. So if you don't set a flex direction, that's what it's going to default to. You can do row reverse, which is going to lay items out from right to left. Column is going to be from top to bottom, and then column reverse is going to be from bottom to top. Now, by default, all these items are going to be laid out onto one line. However, you can change this behavior by setting your flex wrap. And by default, it's set to no wrap. So your Flex items aren't going to wrap onto a second line if your page gets shrunken down enough. but you can change that by setting it to wrap or wrap reverse. Wrap, the flex items will wrap onto multiple lines from top to bottom, and then wrap reverse is they will go onto multiple lines, but from bottom to top. And you can use a shorthand notation of flex flow in which you can set the flex direction and your flex wrap all in one property. So you could set column wrap, or you could do row no wrap, so on and so forth. Now, within your flex container, you're probably going to want to differentiate how you want to lay these items out. Do you want them all right up next to each other at the start of your flex container? Do you want them all at the end of your flex container? Do you want them centered within your flex container? Do you want them evenly distributed within your flex container? Well, you can do all of this with the justifyContent property. So the justifyContent is going to align your items along your main axis. So if you set your flex direction to column, your main axis is going to go from top to bottom. So the justifyContent is going to justify your items from top to bottom. But if it's set to row, your main axis is going to be going from left to right. So your justifyContent property is going to justify your items from left to right. Okay, and you can set some different values on this. You can set flex start. That's going to gather all the items at the start of your container. And you're setting all these properties on the container. You're setting your flex flow, flex wrap, flex direction. All these are set on your container element as well as your justifyContent. You can do flex end. It gathers all the items at the end of your container. Center, space between is going to evenly space your items, except it's not going to leave any margin on the kind of start and end of your flex container. Space around is going to leave a little bit of margin, and same thing with space evenly. There's a subtle nuance between these two, but I think you can usually use either one and it works pretty well. The main difference is space around. It's not going to have as much space in the start and end margin compared to space evenly here. Okay. Now you can also kind of align your items among your cross axis. So justifyContent will justify your items along your main axis. alignItems will do so along the cross axis, running perpendicular to your main axis. You also set this on your parent container here or your flex container. And you can see you can set your alignItems to either be flex start. So it's going to gather them all at the start of your cross axis, flex end, at the end of your cross axis, flex center. You could set it to stretch here, which is going to make sure that your items stretch your entire cross axis. And you can also do baseline, in which will kind of line up to the bottom of the text. Okay. So alignItems is for your cross axis, justifyContent is for your main axis. Then you can also do alignContent. So if you have multiple lines within your flex container, so you see that we have like 3 separate rows right here. If you have 3 separate rows, well, how do you want those rows to be distributed across your flex container? Well, alignContent will allow you to align those separate rows. So instead of aligning by item, you're aligning by either row or column. So this would align all the rows at your flex start, as you can see here. And this aligns all of your rows at the flex end. This puts them all in the center. This will stretch all of your rows to fill all the space. And then similar space between will kind of distribute them more evenly. Same with space around. So you can use this to align separate lines of your flex items within your flex container. And it aligns them among the cross axis. Now you can also set some different gap between your rows and columns using the gap property. So gap of 10 pixels, that's going to set both row and column gap to 10 pixels. Then you can set row gap, which is going to set how much gap you have between your rows, as well as column gap between your columns. Okay, and now there are just a few other properties to know on your flex items. I don't tend to use order much, but you can specify a certain order on your flex items if you want to change it. Usually, the default way through your HTML is going to work just fine, but just know that you can set a different order for your flex children there. And you set all of these properties that I'm going to go over now on your flex children. Now, one thing that is important to know is flex grow. So you can set a number and make your flex children grow proportionately to your other flex children. So here in this example, if you set a flex grow on your flex children to 2, and all of your other flex children have a flex grow of 1, which is the default setting, then your flex child with a flex grow of 2 is going to be twice as big as your children with flex grow of 1. And if this was set to 3, it would be 3 times as big as the flex grow of 1. So it allows you to say how much space that these flex children should take up relative to the other flex children. So here you can see this one with 2 is roughly twice as big as the flex grows of 1. So it just fills up that space in double the proportion. And these numbers just represent a proportion compared to the other flex children that you want it to take up. You can do the very same thing with flex shrink and make them shrink down further than other flex children. And then flex basis, this basically allows you to set like a default width on these flex children. So as you can see, it sets a default size before an element is kind of distributed across the remaining space. And it can be a length in percentage, rem, etc., or it can be a keyword. And then you can set all these properties with a shorthand of flex. This will set your flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis, and it combines them all in one. Now you can also, and I think this is a useful property, align individual flex children. So you can use the alignContent property to align all of your children across the cross axis. But if you want to change this behavior and you want to override that alignment for an individual item, you can use the alignSelf property. So here, all of these items on the container are set to flex start. So they're aligned at the start of your container, but you can, on an individual item, use the alignSelf property, and you can use flex end, flex start, center, and you can change or override that default alignment. So here they set flex end on this child, and you can see that it's aligned to the end of this container compared to being at the start like the other ones, okay? So that is a rundown of how CSS works and the most important properties to know. I think if you have a good understanding of what I just went over, you can already use Flexbox within your applications.